What's up, everybody? Andrew Mahone here with Darium's Competitive Pokemon. Finally going to be talking about a Zoroark GX deck, and I am just super excited to get working on this thing. This is an expanded format. This list is based off of a Japanese list that I saw did really well at a recent tournament over there. It's actually only one card off. Their format does not have A-Specs included, I don't think, since it's XY on, and A-Specs are from like the Plasma series, so I had to pop an A-Spec in there. But other than that, this list is pretty similar to a list that I saw did really well over there at a Japanese tournament, and I was super intrigued by the way it was built. Really think that this thing is kind of your quintessential Zoroark GX deck, just really taking advantage of that righteous beating attack, taking advantage of the fact that you could use Lycanroc to bring up Pokemon on the opponent's bench, and just very, very aggressive. So I like this thing. I think it's got a lot going for it, and I think that it has a lot of potential in expanded format. Verdict is still out in standard format. I think the Zoroark GX is a fantastic card. I'm going to be doing a lot more testing in the upcoming weeks to see where Zoroark GX fits into our standard format. Obviously, without access to Skyfield, Zoroark GX is not going to be hitting those huge numbers that it can hit in expanded format. So I wanted to build an expanded format version of Zoroark GX first, just to show off what this card is really capable of, because an expanded format is where this thing really shines. Just having the option to be able to put 8 Pokemon on your bench, 9 Pokemon in play, means that you're going to be using Righteous Beating for an insane 180 damage. Choice Band, that's perfect 210, meaning that you can knock out opposing Zoroark GX as well in one hit. So super cool, like the archetype, very excited to be showing it off for you all today. So let's go ahead and get started. List starts out with 3 copies of Zoroark GX, 1 copy of Zoroark from Breakthrough, and 4 of the Zorua. You notice that we're playing the new Zorua, and that's because it has an attack that you could use for a double colorless energy. This deck does not play any rainbow energies. This deck does not play any darkness energy. So you can have access to that ram attack, making this Zorua the correct one. Not just because it's insanely cute, but also just because it is actually the better one to use, having access to that ram attack. We also played 2 copies of Lycanroc GX, primarily for that Bloodthirsty Eyes ability, making this an insanely aggressive archetype, being able to bring up Pokemon on your opponent's side of the field, knock them out swiftly with Righteous Beating. We played 3 copies of Rockruff, 2 copies of Shaman EX, 1 copy of Alola Muck, 1 copy of Alolan Grimer, 1 copy of Oricorio, and 3 copies of Tapu Lele GX. So let's talk about these guys a little more. You notice that we do play a split of the Zoroarks. Zoroark GX is going to be our primary attacker. However, Zoroark for Breakthrough is really good in this list as well, just being able to get in there as a non-EX, non-GX attacker, and can mind jack for some pretty significant damage, especially since you are playing Skyfield in your own list. Sometimes your opponent will take advantage of your Skyfield and really flex out, benching a lot of things, and if they get a little overzealous and bench too many things, then you can come in with your Zoroark and mind jack. Also, this Zoroark does give your deck a lot of much needed mobility, which is really nice. You do play some float stones in here, so you can use the stand-in to come in. You can heal all your special conditions that way as well if you happen to get paralyzed or stay asleep, and then you could retreat with the float stone for free and bring up whoever you would like. So the Zoroark for Breakthrough gets a lot of mileage in this list as well, but the Zoroark GX is the bread and butter of this list. That trade ability is just so good. Being able to discard a card from your hand in order to draw 2 cards means that you're going to be able to grind through your deck very smoothly and very consistently. You're going to be able to find the cards that you need in order to fill your bench, and then perform really big Righteous Beating attacks. Now, we do not play any Darkness Energy in this deck, so your Trickster GX is going to be off limits, but that does not really matter. This list is all about just pumping out huge Righteous Beatings, using trade to make sure that you are drawing consistently, and just taking 6 prizes very, very swiftly. Lycanroc GX, also just a fantastic partner for Zoroark. If Zoroark proves to be very popular in expanded format, I mentioned not only can Zoroark GX knock out opposing Zoroark GX with that righteous beating attack with a choice band and Skyfield in play. But Lycanroc GX very swiftly knocks out Zoroark GX as well. So this card is not only really good for bringing up your opponent's bench Pokemon with Bloodthirsty Eyes on evolution, brings up one of your opponent's bench Pokemon really good, just making this deck super aggressive, meaning that since you're able to play cards like, N, and you could use Bloodthirsty Eyes in the same turn. That's so cool. I mean, it's like being able to play 2 supporters in the same turn, which is absolutely nuts. You also have Claw Smash, which is really good for knocking out opponents' Zoroark GXs. We play 1 strong and 2 copies of Fighting Energy in here, meaning that you could Claw Slash relatively easily. It's kind of like, it feels like using Razor Leaf and Decidueye almost. You only play 3 copies of Fighting Energy, but every once in a while you'll find yourself, just drop a Fighting Energy on the Lycanroc GX, so that any point later on down the line, you could use Claw Slash in order to take out, a Pokemon that is weak to fighting. So I really like it for that. And then Dangerous Rogue GX is our GX attack of choice in this list. It says this attack does 50 damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. That is so good in combination with Skyfield, since your opponent is probably going to be taking advantage of your own Skyfield if they have any more than 3 bench Pokemon. If they have 4 bench Pokemon, you do 200 damage. If they have 5, you're doing 250. This is a huge one-hit knockout attack and just an awesome option that this deck has in order to take some big, crazy one-hit knockouts. We do play 2 copies of Shaman EX, obviously very good for that set-up ability, and you can use Sky Return as well just to chip things away and weaken things up, but being able to use setup really makes the draw in this deck very aggressive. I mean, you could use trade to draw, you could use setup to draw, all around very awesome, very consistent. In combination with 3 copies of Tapu Lele GX, I mean, you are never going to be missing a beat. Having Wonder Tag set up, you definitely are going to be able to draw through your deck as consistently as you would like. You do have option to use Energy Drive in this list just to be able to, hit something. Maybe if you had to 2-hit knockout something, you could just poke it with Energy Drive for knockout. If you were not able to get a Zoroark GX fully powered up with all your bench Pokemon, or if your opponent is playing Sudowoodo and you can't get your Muck out, then you might be doing more 2-hit knockout kind of strategies, and Tapu Lele GX can come into play. We do play our 1 copy of Oricorio in here, really good for those Night March and Vespa Queen decks. Definitely want to be playing one of these if you are playing expanded format. We do also play a 1/1 Alolan Muckline. Now, this card is very good for Sudowoodo. So if your opponent plays the Sudowoodo with that Roadblock ability, not to mention you could also play Sudowoodo in this list. If Zoroark GX proves itself to be a top contender, you may want to chuck one of these into your deck just so that you have the option to limit your opponent. That would be something to consider as well. But, the upcoming expanded format, not really defined yet, not really sure what kind of cards we're going to be needing to play in those. You could play a copy of Sudowoodo yourself. But we do have an Alolan Grimer in here and an Alolan Muck. This is to nerf your opponent's Sudowoodo. So you set up the Alolan Muck, and then their Roadblock does not affect you at all, which is very nice. And not only that, you turn off, Wonder Tag, you turn off setup, so you make it so harder for your opponent to set up in order to draw and to execute their primary strategies. That's it for the Pokemon. Let's move on to the supporters in this deck. This deck has a pretty thin supporter count since we do have that trade ability, which just allows us to draw through our deck. We are playing 3 copies of Professor Sycamore, 2 copies of N, 2 copies of Bridget, 1 copy of Teammates, 1 copy of Hex, and 1 copy of Guzma. You don't really need Guzma too much in this deck because you have that Bloodthirsty Eyes ability that you're going to be using most of the time to bring up your opponent's Pokemon. Sometimes you just need to get in there with an actual copy of Guzma and either use the switching effect, or maybe there's a Garbodor in play that's stopping your abilities from working, or you don't have access to Bloodthirsty Eyes. It's nice to have 1 copy of Guzma to fall back on. We also have 1 copy of Hex Maniac, which is very good against ability-oriented decks, especially Gardevoir GX. I mean, if you're playing against the electric deck with Dynamotor, if you're playing against a Rain Dance deck, if you're playing against Archie's Blastoise, Hex Maniac's very good against these decks as well. Hex Maniac, just a nice disruptive card, good option to have. Teammates is fantastic in this list since we do play Puzzle of Time in here. Based on the Japanese list that I saw, who's playing Puzzle of Time, Teammates is fantastic for being able to search out the puzzles, play them together, and then get 2 cards from your discard pile back into your hand. Makes the resources go a lot further in this list. Really like Puzzle of Time, really like Teammates in conjunction with Puzzle of Time. 2 copies of Bridget is nice just because you could use this card in the middle of the game as well. If you get a Sky Field, you could use Bridget to fill up your bench and make sure that you get those Pokemon out to fill, your bench and do as much damage as you can with that Righteous Beating. So really like Bridget in here, not only for setting up a mid-game as well after you get your Sky Field into play. And then, just to round out the draw, we do have 3 copies of Professor Sycamore and 2 copies of N, which is just fine since we do play 4 copies of Versus Seeker and have a dowsing machine in here as well as 4 Puzzles of Time. So we do have the option to draw even without the Sycamores and the Ns. You could get these things back with Puzzle of Time, with Versus Seeker, with Dowsing Machine, and then you can also just trade in order to draw. So there are plenty of drawing options in this deck. I'm not nervous about playing a low amount of supporters or anything like that. This deck is very flexible and has a lot of recovery options. So we do play 4 copies of Versus Seeker, 4 copies of Ultra Ball, 4 copies of Puzzle of Time, 2 Choice Bands, 2 Float Stones, 1 Target Whistle, which I think is an interesting inclusion in here, 1 copy of Dowsing Machine, 1 copy of Field Blower, and 3 copies of Sky Field. So let's talk about these real quick. Target Whistle is an insane card. This card was originally popularized in Night March archetypes, but in conjunction with Bloodthirsty Eyes, this card could be a game ender. Imagine your opponent has a Shaman EX in the discard pile. You could easily just Target Whistle that Shaman EX back onto the bench, Bloodthirsty Eyes it into the active position, and use that Righteous Beating attack on Zoroark GX for the knockout. I mean, you could easily, swiftly end games with this, even just with teammates being able to grab Target Whistle, bring something up onto the bench, and then Bloodthirsty Eyes to bring it into the active position. You could pull off some nutty combinations with this Target Whistle. So Target Whistle, super good in combination with Bloodthirsty Eyes. Highly recommend giving that a try. We also play 4 copies of Versus Seeker in expanded format. That is just a very standard thing to do since we are going to want to have an option to get our one-of supporters back. Play as many versus as many teammates as we would like. Play, up to 4 or 5 copies of Hex Maniac. Play up to 4 or 5 copies of Guzma. All these things are just really good. You really want to have, the flexibility of Versus Seeker. I mean, just the difference between, expanded format with Versus Seeker and standard format without it. I mean, we only play 2 copies of N, but you could play up to 6 copies of N, more even. With Puzzle of Time, we could play like 8, 9 copies of N with Dowsing Machine. We could play so many copies of N. How many can we actually do? We have 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's a lot. You can play a lot of copies of Ed. With all these recovery options, if you really set your mind to it, you can play a lot. You can get a lot of mileage out of those 2 supporters that we play. So that's really cool about this. Love Versus Seeker in expanded format. I mean, 4 of is kind of just a no-brainer, especially in this list. We do play 2 copies of Choice Band, which is just nice, being able to hit that 210 damage with the Righteous Beating. Really love that. Also, just being able to boost your numbers if you can't quite get your bench maxed out. Choice Band can help fix some of the math for you just to be able to hit the correct things. Say you only have 7 Pokemon in play, you're doing 140 damage. Choice Band boosts that to 180. If you have 8 Pokemon in play, Choice Band could easily boost that up over 180 damage as well. So Choice Band, nice option to have in here. Being able to get the back with Puzzle of Time is really cool. 2 copies of Floatstone just gives you mobility. You can slap it on your Zoroark for breakthrough to stand in and retreat with it, but also just a nice little switching card to have. We only play 3 copies of Skyfield, which I think is fine. With Puzzle of Time and Dowsing Machine, you really have options to get your Skyfield back if you need them. So I'm not too worried about this. Each of your Skyfields means that, on the turn that you play Skyfield, you should be able to kind of flex out and fill your bench so that you could take a big knockout on those turns. I think that, Skyfield, a lot of your opponents will find themselves using it as well. So, it's I think it's a fine card to have only 3 of in here, especially with your recovery options that you have available to you. think the inclusion of Puzzle of Time is really interesting in here. I love how flexible it makes the list. I love that you have the option to recover resources that are going to be good in some matchups. Love that you could get your Field Blower back if you need your Field Blower against a Garbodor deck, things like that. Love that you could get the Target Whistle back. I think Teammates in combination with Puzzle of Time is just such a good combination. I spent a lot of time playing with that card combination in Night March decks. I think with Bloodthirsty Eyes, just the whole Puzzle of Time, Bloodthirsty Eyes, Target Whistle, yeah, it just makes such an aggressive deck, such an aggressive archetype, and I think it's just very good. Puzzle of Time, being able to get the 2 cards back from your discard pile, makes your energy go further too. Since we do play a low energy count, you could easily get double colorless back with your Puzzle of Time as well. Anything that you need in order to pull off, some big knockouts, you can retrieve with Puzzle of Time, especially since you're going to be discarding things for Zoroark's trade ability too in order to draw through your deck. I chose Dowsing Machine in this list over Computer Search just to kind of go in tandem with the whole logic of the Puzzle of Time thing. I've seen Dowsing Machine see a lot of success in decks that do play Puzzle of Time, since if you have to discard a puzzle early with a Sycamore or something like that, you could Dowsing Machine for the puzzle back and then play 2 puzzles at the same time. I really like it for that, but also just giving you some extra recovery in the list. You could get a Skyfield back with it. You could get your Target Whistle back with it. You could get a supporter back with it if you need to. But I really do like it in combination with Puzzle. Kind of gives you a 5th puzzle, which is really nice, allowing you to get even more things back from the discard pile. So I do like it for that. I feel like Computer Search, isn't quite as needed in this list, especially since we do have Teammates and we do have Trade, which just really allows us to draw aggressively. What I want in this list is not to be able to search out the things I need right when I need them. What I want is to be able to recover them for the late game, since we do have a limited amount of resources in this list. So that about wraps it up for the items. Let's move on to the energy counts. Like I had mentioned before, there are not a lot of energy in here. We are playing 2 copies of Fighting, 1 copy of Strong, and 4 copies of double colorless energy. The 1 copy of Strong Energy is interesting in here. In some situations, it can boost your numbers just right. If you need to knock out a Shaman EX with Lycanroc, being able to boost 110 to 130 does get you there. Also, just for that GX attack, being able to get just over that hump. If they have 3 bench Pokemon, the Strong Energy makes it so you're doing 170. If they have 4 bench Pokemon, your GX attack is doing 220, which is good against some Pokemon that have 210 hit points. If they have 5 bench Pokemon, it can get you up over 200. I mean, at that point, you're pretty much knocking out anything that you would need to knock out. But, the Strong Energy does help you hit some good numbers, but it's not totally necessary either. So we do play 1 copy just to have the option, but the 2 fighting energies, since most of the time you won't need the boosting math that Strong Energy provides. It's just a nice little option to have. Then of course we do have our 4 double colorless energy, and the reason we can get away with playing so few amount of energy is because we play those Puzzles of Time and can just retrieve them pretty much on command. Since we are playing a big 1-hit knockout deck, I mean, you really if you're playing against a Pokemon EX, Pokemon GX deck, you really should only need to attack 3 or 4, 5 times max in order to win the game. You should be taking big EX, GX knockouts every time you attack, so you conserve your double colorless energy for when you're ready to strike big, take a big knockout, things like that. You might Sky Return something, especially if you Sky Return with a Choice Band, you can do 60 damage to it, and then the following turn you could Righteous Beating, for knockout, things like that. You're going to want to be smart with your energy. You can't just go around throwing it anywhere or you will run out, but if you're careful, use your Puzzle of Times correctly, you could really, go the distance with just this amount of energy. So that's it for the Zoroark GX expanded deck profile. I'm excited about this thing to see what it could do. I'm going to be getting some games in with it shortly so that I can see how I want to improve the list going forward. But I wanted to just give you guys something to look at as far as where to start. If you wanted to, you could cut a Bridget for that Pseudo Wudo just to put that back into the deck. Really good in the mirror if you're worried about the mirror. Really good against things like Mega Ray as well. Go ahead and slap that Pseudo Wudo in there. You can take out a Bridget. 2 Bridget is good, but maybe not entirely necessary. So that's probably where I'd find the cut if I had to find a cut for this list. So that about wraps it up for Zoroark GX. Thank you all for watching the video. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Peace.